In this video, I'm going to show you how to get Sega Genesis, Sega CD, Sega Master System, and Sega Game Gear games up and running on a Nintendo Wii U using Retroarch. Over the last couple of years, I've really started getting into Sega Genesis stuff. I didn't own the system growing up, I was a Super Nintendo owner, but my friends had Genesis, and I loved playing games on it whenever I'd go to their house. With the inclusion of Genesis on the Wii Virtual Console, I really got to dive into more Genesis titles before actually owning the Genesis myself. Unfortunately, the Sega Genesis didn't make the cut on the Wii U Virtual Console, and I'm really confused as to why, probably due to the lack of support the Wii U had in general, but still, it was a hurtful blow to those of us that wanted to have Genesis games with the updated features of the Wii U Virtual Console. But thanks to homebrew and emulation, we can now play Genesis games on our Wii U as we should have been able to all along through the Virtual Console. And not only that, Sega CD, Master System, and Game Gear are all along for the ride. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to get them all set up. So let's dive in. To get started with Sega Genesis, CD, Game Gear, Master System emulation, we need games for all of these systems. For Genesis games in particular, you can use something like the Retro 2 to dump them very easily, or there's actually some hardware mods you could do to a Genesis to dump them through a serial port or something. It was really weird, but it's doable. And then for Sega CD games, you can easily back these up using an optical drive on your computer. So if you happen to have a large physical collection of Genesis or Sega CD games, you can back those up and play them on any emulator of your choice. Now for Sega CD games in particular, make sure that they are in bin-queue format just to make sure that they will work properly. But once you have your games sourced, we just need to put them onto our Wii U SD cards. So on my Wii U SD card, I made a folder named Retroarch ROMs. This is just where I'm putting all of my games for Retroarch during the course of this tutorial process. So I'm just going to add my Sega games to this folder. And once those are finished copying, I'm just going to go back up to the root of my SD card. Now we do need one more required file to get Sega CD games up and running, and that is a Sega CD BIOS file. If you happen to own a Sega CD and an EverDrive, you can actually back up your own Sega CD BIOS from your actual hardware very easily, and I have a video on my channel showing you how to do just that, and I'll put a link to this in the description below. But once you've sourced a Sega CD BIOS, whether you've dumped it yourself or have resorted to shadier methods, it needs to be named properly. So for a US Sega CD BIOS, it needs to be named BIOS_CD_U.bin. For Europe, BIOS_CD_E.bin. And then for Japan, BIOS_CD_J.bin. So get your BIOS file named accordingly, and then we can add it to our Wii U SD card. So BIOS files need to go into the Retroarch System folder. So on the Wii U, that is in the Retroarch folder, Cores, and System. So from here, just drag your Sega CD BIOS in, and you're good to go. Once you have your games and BIOS files placed, go ahead and close out of your SD card, take it out of your computer, and put it back into your Wii U and get it booted up. Now, just as a quick reminder, this video is a continuation of my Wii U Retroarch installation guide, so if you need help getting Retroarch installed on your Wii U, initial settings, or how to install a forwarder channel, refer back to that video for how to do so. But now that we got that out of the way, go ahead and boot into Retroarch using either the homebrew launcher or a forwarder channel. Once Retroarch is loaded, we are free to begin loading up our Genesis, Master System, Sega CD, or Game Gear games, and to do so, using the long method, you could go to Load Core, press right on your D-pad to go down to Sega, and find the Sega Genesis Plus GX core. Press A to load it. Once the core has finished loading, we can go to Load Content, and then navigate to where you have your games stored. So again, for me, I had them under SD card, Retroarch ROMs, and then I had them under Sega CD, Sega Genesis, Sega Master System, and Game Gear games. So I could go into any one of these folders, choose a game, press A on it, and it will run. I personally don't care for this method. It is really slow and just takes a lot longer to get into your actual games, especially when you first boot up Retroarch. So instead, I like to make a games playlist. So to do so, I'm just going to back out to the main menu here. And over on the left side of the screen, there is an Import Content tab. So scroll down to this, and then scroll to Manual Scan. Press A. Now, Content Directory, choose one of your games folders. So I'm going to start with Genesis. So SD card, Retroarch ROMs, Sega Genesis games, scan this directory. System name, press right on your D-pad to go down to Sega, and choose the Mega Drive / Genesis. And now for default core, we're going to choose Genesis plus GX, so right on your D-pad again to go down to Sega and choose Genesis plus GX. Now if you have your game separated into subfolders, make sure scan recursively is on, and if you have the game zipped, make sure scan inside archives is on. Once you have the options set the way you need them, go ahead and start the scan. And once the scan is completed, you will have a new Mega Drive / Genesis playlist down here. But now let's go ahead and do the same for our other systems. So import content, manual scan, SD card, RetroArch ROMs, and I'm going to do Game Gear games this time just because it's the top folder I have. Scan this directory. System name, we're going to change this to Sega Game Gear. Default core is going to remain the same. And then scan recursively, scan inside archives, enable those if you need them, and then start the scan. And then I'm going to do it again for Master System, so SD card, RetroArch ROMs, Sega Master System games, scan this directory. We're going to change this to the Sega Master System / Mark III. Default core is the same, make sure scan recursively is on, scan inside archives are on if you need them, and then start the scan. And finally, we're going to do Sega CD, and this one's a little bit different, which is why I saved it for last. So for the content directory, we're going to go to our Sega CD games, scan this directory, system name, Sega Mega CD / Sega CD, default core is going to remain the same, but this time we're going to set a file extension, so press A on this, and type in Q. Sega CD games are supposed to be in bin Q format, but when you do a scan and you don't specify that you only want to find the Q files, you will get a different playlist entry for every bin file it finds. Depending on how you dump your Sega CD games, they could be merged or they could be split into multiple bin files, up to 27, 28 tracks, and we do not want that many entries for a single game because if you try to run it from the wrong one, it won't run. So setting the file extension, we're only going to search for Q files, which is what RetroArch requires for these games to run in the first place. Now make sure scan recursively is on for this one, because chances are you have your Sega CD games in subfolders. And don't have these zipped. They won't work zipped. Don't do it. Anyway, go ahead and start the scan. But once all the scans are complete, you will have new playlist entries for each of these systems. So there we go. We got Game Gear, Genesis, Sega CD, and Master System. But with the playlist made, we can easily select a game to play just by going over to it, pressing A, and pressing A again to run. And there we go, Sega Master System games up and running on a Wii U. This is really fun. And Master System games are running like an absolute dream. Phantasy Star here is one of my favorite RPGs, and I just love being able to play this on practically anything these days. It's so great. And Game Gear games as well are running like a champ. And I have to say, they look really great on the gamepad. And Sega Genesis running just as well as one would hope. Seriously, Nintendo, why no Genesis on the Wii U Virtual Console? Why? Why not? And finally, we have Sega CD, which is running perfectly if you have the BIOS properly named and configured. You know, I find the Sega CD an absolutely fascinating add-on, and well, honestly, the entire Genesis line of add-ons I find completely fascinating. Unfortunately for Wii U, there isn't a core that can support the 32X, but thankfully we do have Sega CD and, of course, Master System and Game Gear. But for those of you looking to get Sega games up and running on your Nintendo Wii U, that is the process. Just get your game files and then get your Sega CD BIOS file placed, and you should be up and running. But the time has come to discuss more advanced core options available within the Genesis GX Plus core. So pressing the home button on our Wii U gamepad brings up the Retroarch quick menu, and from here you can scroll down to Options and press A. Now our first option is System Hardware, so by default this is set to auto, and that should work for most use cases, but if you have a game or like certain homebrew that's not being detected properly, you can manually set what system it is supposed to be running on. Next is System Region, and again this should be fine for most people, but if you have a game that isn't being detected properly, or if you have a cartridge that has regional variations within it, you can manually set the region to see those in action. Leave system lockups on. Skip system boot ROM. Now CD system BRAM. This I recommend changing to per game. There really isn't a lot of storage space on the Sega CD BRAM, and you will run out quickly if you have it shared, so definitely recommend setting this to per game. Ignore 68K address error. Ignore cartridge lock on. Next we have the Master System FM synthesizer, and I like to turn this one on. Gives your Master System games that support it just that little bit of extra sound quality. Next we have the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive FM chip, and by default we are on the MAME YM2612, and this is honestly what I recommend for the Wii U. There is a more accurate Genesis sound chip available with the nuked YM2612, but this really requires a lot of CPU power, and the Wii U doesn't really have a lot of that. And I've experienced some lag in some games using the nuked version, so just leave this one on MAME. Sound output, you can turn this between mono and stereo. And next we have a load of audio options, so there's the PSG preamp level, FM preamp level, audio filters. The audio filter I recommend turning on the low pass, that way it sounds a little bit more accurate to the original Model 1 Genesis hardware. Then you could also set the low pass filter %. Next we have frame skip. The Wii U is able to run these systems at full speed, so you shouldn't need to use frame skip, so you could just ignore this, and frame skip threshold. Next we have the Blarg NTSC filter, and this lets us mimic a bunch of old displays, so we start off with monochrome black and white, and this one takes its sweet time to load up, that's fine. But yep, you can mimic an old black and white TV. Composite video. S-video, gets a little bit sharper. And then RGB signals, and I love the RGB one because it looks like my Genesis running through RGB. Like, I think this is really neat stuff. And it doesn't seem to cause any slowdown or lag, so you can do any one of these without penalty. So, if you want to have it on, you can have it on. If you don't, you can leave it off. But one of the benefits of using this, so the Genesis relied heavily on composite video to blend effects, so as you can see here, the waterfall is not actually joined. It's a trick to give transparency effect. It's actually every other line. So if we turn the Blarg NTSC filter over to composite, it blends the waterfall together as was intended by the original developers. Got some weird shimmering going on with it right now. Not sure what that's about, but hey, that's alright. Yeah, like even S-video. S-video is a little bit better. Once you get to the sharper display outputs, it just reveals the effect in its fullness here, doesn't it? And then, of course, you could just leave it off entirely and just have the crispest output possible. Now, our next option is an LCD ghosting filter, and this option lets you mimic the ghosting seen on a Game Gear or Sega Nomad handheld system, and it's a pretty neat effect to have on emulation. So, as you can see, it just gives you that really interesting ghosting, and it's a very authentic Game Gear type experience. And I'm actually quite fond of this. For Game Gear games, I want the LCD ghosting enabled, but considering that this is a core-wide feature, I have to manually save this per game that I want to use it on. So, for example, on the Lion King for Game Gear here, I can just go up and create a game options file for this one, so that way every time I load up Lion King, that ghosting will be enabled for it, but for other games it won't be. Our next option is borders. So by default, Genesis Plus GX tries to remove a lot of the overscan area present in Genesis and Master System, Game Gear games. But you can re-enable these if you want them, so you could just set this to the top or bottom, left or right, or have the full border selection. I personally like to have it off. There's no useful information in those borders most of the time, so might as well pretty up the image. The next option is also Game Gear specific, and it is to get Game Gear games running in a Master System resolution. I don't really find this that useful. All it does is really just display a bunch of garbage data on the sides of the screen, so I don't bother using this one. Our next option is Master System specific, and it's to get rid of the left border. As you can see here in Phantasy Star, the left side of the screen just has a bunch of just unused real estate. So you can enable this option and it will get rid of it. So now when you play your Master System games, there is no longer that border of useless data. So you can enable or disable this as you see fit. Next we have the core provided aspect ratio. I like to set this to NTSC just because I run NTSC systems. These games are meant to be stretched to a 4:3 aspect ratio, so I just really like to set it to NTSC manually. Next we have interlace mode to output, and this is for games like Sonic 2 and multiplayer or some other ones that had a higher resolution mode. So there's two options available. There's single field and double field. Double field is technically more accurate, but it has like interlacing and flickering, so you might not enjoy the look of that. So single field might do you better. I prefer double field for authenticity. The flickering doesn't really bother me that much. Next you could choose to enable or disable light gun crosshairs. And then for light gun input, if you have light gun games, change this to touchscreen so that way you can use the Wii U gamepad to play light gun games. I don't have any Genesis light gun games to personally test that this works, but I imagine it should. Next, you can invert the mouse Y-axis for Genesis mouse input. I don't have anything that uses a Genesis mouse. I don't even know if a mouse works on the Wii U. I haven't really experimented with it because I haven't tested anything with it yet, but the option is here if you need it. Our next option allows us to overclock the emulated CPU for Genesis games, so if there is a game you're playing that has hardware-induced lag, you can overclock the emulated CPU to try to overcome that. I personally prefer the lag. I like authenticity, so I don't mess with this a whole lot. It can cause glitches, and I'm not sure how the higher speeds will handle on the Wii U, but you can experiment with it and see what you think. And finally, our last option is to remove the sprite limit for all of our supported games here. So when there's too many sprites on a single scan line, it would cause flickering. This option will remove that. But that's going to do it as far as core options are concerned. Again, if there are certain options that you want enabled for certain games, like I had for the LCD ghosting for Game Gear games, you can save those as a game override at the top of the options menu here. Alternatively, if you want to save your options core-wide, you could just back out, go down to overrides, and save the core override. Now, normally in this part of the video, I'd start talking about shaders because there's some really cool ones we could do for Game Gear especially, but Wii U shaders are an interesting beast, and I'm planning on doing a dedicated video to cover those at a future date after the core videos are finished, so stay tuned for that. But one last thing I want to touch on in this video before we call it good is controls, because you can actually have a 3-button Genesis controller or a 6-button Genesis controller, and some games wouldn't run without a 3-button one, which is what the core is set to by default, but playing games like Street Fighter or other fighting games is just a nightmare on a 3-button pad. So going up to the controls tab here, you can go into port 1 controls, and you could choose between a joypad with 3 buttons, 6 buttons, or a Master System 2-button pad, and any other number of devices here. By default, it is set to auto, so it will recognize that you need to have certain controllers for certain systems, but just in case you end up with a 3-button pad on a game you want a 6-button pad on, you could just come in here and manually choose between them. But that's going to do it as far as Genesis, Sega CD, Sega Game Gear, and Sega Master System emulation on the Wii U is concerned. Bit more involved this time if you want to do Sega CD games, otherwise it's pretty much plug and play. But as always, if you happen to have any questions, feel free to ask me down in the comment section below, and I will do my best to try to help you out. But now if you could all do me just a huge favor, and be sure to hit that like or dislike button, just depending on how much you like today's tutorial. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that sub button so you can see when new videos just like this go live. Truly goes a long way to helping out the channel, and I am so grateful to all of you for that. This place is growing so great, and I'm blown away by it. Thank you all so much. If you'd like to further help support the channel, you could also check out that join button here on YouTube or the Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. A little really goes a long way to keeping the place running, and I am just so grateful to all of you who have already done so. Thank you so much, my champions. But that's going to do it for this one, so until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, stay awesome, and we will see you all back next video.